to another help session for sound for video. And we have a couple of things we'll talk about today. Hopefully some of you can join us. And as you do, come on over to the Google Plus page where you can submit your questions, or for those that are enrolled in the class, if you check your email, you can certainly join via webcam. You don't have to turn your camera on if you're not into that. Totally understand. You can actually just join, turn your camera off, and we can talk here as well. So hopefully give everybody a few options there. We have Rick with us today, Rick Pollock. Did I say your last name right, Rick?
Yes, you did.
All right, good. All right. Thanks for joining us again this week.
Thanks, Curtis.
All right. I'm going to check the Q&A panel and see if we have anything queued up here as yet. And it looks like we do not have anything queued up yet. So again, for those that join here in the next few minutes, you're welcome to submit your questions again over at the Google Plus page. And then Rick, I know you had a question as well. Why don't we kick it off with that?
Okay. And Curtis, going through the class, there was one section about setting up your recorder and using the external recorder instead of the audio in the camera. And the default settings on my Zoom recorder has a sampling rate of 44.1, and I know video, it's typically 48 kilohertz. And understand if you're doing a film or Blu-ray that the output's going to be at 48 kilohertz. But the videos I'm doing are for YouTube, and researching that a bit, YouTube seems to take whatever you have and resample it down to 44.1. So my question is, well, if that's going to be the end product, if everything I'm doing is going on YouTube at 44.1, why not record my external audio at 44.1 and then not worrying about any loss of quality with resampling?
And that is a great question. And first of all, I have to say thanks, Rick, because I did not realize that that YouTube was resampling down to 44.1. I thought they were leaving it at 48. And in fact, if you know, as you go out and research, the recommendation that YouTube makes is that when you upload your video, you upload it with the sample rate at 48 kilohertz, which is kind of funny in light of the fact that they're sampling it down to 44.1. So it's a very good question. And for those that aren't as familiar with this or haven't done the course, a sample rate refers to the number of times per second that your recorder, whether that's a camera or an audio recorder, measures the amplitude of the current waveform, the sound. And it actually records that as a particular point in time. And so 44.1 refers to 44,100 samples per second. 48 kilohertz refers to 48,000 samples per second. And of course, they can go higher than that as well, or even lower than that. CD quality is 44.1. So that's the standard for CDs. I think that's generally the standard as well for audio distributed on the internet. So for example, iTunes, I don't know that for sure. We need to confirm that, but it's my understanding that it's probably 44.1 as well. Most video formats, the standard is actually 48. For example, most of our cameras that when we shoot video, will record the audio to 48 kilohertz as well. But when we have these external audio recorders, we have a little bit more flexibility. We can actually change that sample rate. And most consumer grade cameras and even prosumer grade cameras, there's no setting to change the sample rate on the camera itself. So let's see here. So I think, Rick, you asked a good question there in regards to, you know, if the goal is to upload the video to YouTube and you know it's going to be to 44.1 kilohertz, shouldn't you just go ahead and shoot or record at 44.1? And I think the answer to that is, yeah, if you know that's the only destination for your video, then I think it makes sense to go to 44.1 kilohertz. There are other considerations also. If you are actually producing your videos for other platforms or other distribution means, even if it's on the web, I think it's probably okay to go to 48. I actually produce all of mine at 48 because I want to be able to have the flexibility to post them in other places as well where they may support 48. I haven't noticed, to my ear, and my ear is not perfect, but I have not noticed any sort of additional distortion or any other artifacting when I upload at 48 kilohertz to YouTube and then listen back on YouTube, played back at 44.1. So I don't know how much of a practical difference there is, but I think I would say, yeah, if you know you're going to YouTube, I don't think there's anything that would hurt going 44.1 if you also know that you're not going to be distributing that video anywhere else. And even if you do distribute it somewhere else, as long as they can support 44.1, and almost all of them can. And in fact, the modern computer operating systems at this point in time are intelligent enough to be able to manage most of that for us. So you're not going to see a big issue there. So I think your point, Rick, that you also made when we talked about this earlier was that, you know, if I know I'm going to 44.1 in the end anyway, that's what it's going to be in the end on YouTube. Doesn't it make more sense to go ahead and upload it that way and do, you know, record it and upload it that way so that we don't have to rely on YouTube's resampling process to get it down to 44.1 from whatever else you uploaded it at? And I think that's a good point. Again, I haven't noticed any major differences, again, to my ear, which are, my ears are not perfect, but I think that's a fine point. So
yeah, and I think it's probably more just because I'm an electrical engineer by background and saying, well, this is looking more at the numbers than listening. But I think maybe one other thing to think about is if you're putting in intro or outro music or any kind of background music and something that you've created on your iPad or, you know, on just music you've purchased as your background music or intro music, that's probably 44.1.
Yep.
And then, you know, mixing it, you probably can't tell, but I'm just thinking, well, as an engineer, that's a cleaner way, that if everything's 44.1 and then you mix it all down together, everything's 44.1, YouTube's 44.1, then your audio is going to be clean. There's no chance of getting any artifacts on it.
Yeah, that's a great point, because then if you do have audio that's 44.1 and you have dialogue that's 48, you export it from your, you know, editing application, whatever that may be, at 48. That means the music is getting resampled to 48 kilohertz, and then you upload it to YouTube, then it's getting resampled down to 44.1. So there's a lot of manipulation there, and I think the chances for artifacting and distortion to go up when you kind of are going back and forth like that multiple times in particular.
Oh, great. Well, thanks for explaining it and going through the question. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good one that I hadn't thought about before, and so I think it's a worthwhile one. In fact, while we were talking here, I was tempted to open it up, the last video I produced, to see what the sample rate is on the music that I used for the intro and outro, because I'm pretty sure it's 44.1 as well, which is you know, again, then that means we're doing a couple of resamplings on that once it gets up to YouTube. So interesting point.
Great.
All right. Very good. Thanks again for that, Rick. We appreciate that. And we have a new joiner here. Bob, welcome.
Hey, Curtis. How are you tonight?
Doing great. How about you?
I'm all right. Is it my turn?
Yeah, you're up.
All right. Well, that was perfect timing then. I have a couple of files that were recorded too low in volume. Is there a way to increase that volume inside of a software or inside of the file that's existing, so I don't have to go back and recreate it?
Yes, there are ways to do that. In fact, let's do a little screen share here, and I will show you. Just to maybe to make this easier, Bob, what are you using to edit your audio or your video?
I can do anything. I use a Mac, and
Okay.
I have no experience with anything. I think I do have a couple different programs, but again,
Okay.
I don't have any preference.
Okay. Let me just show you just really quickly here in Adobe Audition. It's very similar in Audacity if you're going to use that. You can, to some extent, do it also in the video editing apps, but not with as much precision. And let me just show you what we mean here. So I'm going to get Audition fired up here. And we will share the screen on that. Give me just a second here.
I like your moving blankets in the background there. That's what I've got too.
It helps a lot. We've got a pretty echoey, reverberant room here. So, okay, so we have Adobe Audition here. Let's get this open here. We'll pull up a file really quick. Let's go. All right, I won't be able to actually play these back, but over the Google Hangout. I haven't figured out how to get that to work, but I can show you visually here. So this is another audio file here that is not particularly loud. You can see it peaks at, you get some of the transient peaks that go all the way up to -10, but in general it's about -12 to -15. And if we were to play that back on YouTube in particular, you would find it, if you were listening to another video that sounded really well produced and then you played yours, this would sound very quiet. And it would be a case where your listeners or your viewers would probably have to turn up their volume a significant amount to be able to hear what was going on. So there are a lot of more complex things you can do, but just straight away, I mean, the very simplest thing you could do is just increase the gain here. And in the case of Audition, it's just a matter of highlighting the entire file and increasing the gain. There are some problems with that potentially. If I go loud enough here, or what would seem perceptually loud enough if I played this back, the problem is now that some of my clips or some of my transient waveforms here are actually getting clipped. And let me kind of zoom in and show you what that looks like. Whoops. We've got a problem here. So these actually don't look too bad, but sometimes they get completely chopped off, and it's not a pleasant sound. You do hear some distortion. So that alone is probably not the best way to do it. So typically what I will do, again, this is just a quick and dirty way of doing it. If I just drag, well, let me just show you a couple other things here. So if you don't have this match volume panel down here, you'll come up to Window and choose Match Volume. That'll bring this up. You drag your audio clip down into the window here, and then here you can set what is called a loudness. Well, LUFS stands for loudness units full scale. So this is loudness, which is a little bit different than amplitude that we normally measure in dB. But loudness actually has more to do with perceptual loudness. That is how loud something sounds, and not so much what full scale dB reading we have for any particular waveform at any given point in time. So, for example, here I could just say -24 LUFS, which is actually the standard for television in the United States. Go ahead and just click. Well, actually, also make sure that you have this use limiting checked. Click Run. And you can see it's made the waveforms a little bit bigger. And it's also taking care of any potential clipping here by just applying a hard limiter so that these waveforms or these transients don't actually make it to 0 dB and create any sort of distortion. Now, it's actually a little bit more complicated than that, but that's the quick and dirty on how to do that.
You said that's in Audacity?
This one is in Audition. We can do the same thing. Yep. That's Adobe. So let me pull up Audacity as well, and I'll show you there. The trick with Audacity is that while it's an awesome piece of software and it's free, it does have some limitations, and let's get that one up here. Oops, share Audacity. Okay, we'll open that same file, and it's going to be over here. Okay, so here it is, the same exact clip that we were looking at before, this time in Audacity. Now, the trick here is that you don't have any sort of loudness volume matching capabilities built into Audacity. So doing it here is a little bit different, and in fact, what I would do typically is I would probably apply some compression first. I don't want to make this too complicated, so let's not do that. Let's just go up to Effect and use this normalize function. And let's normalize our maximum amplitude to -2 dB. Go ahead and click OK. And it does a similar type thing. The only difference is here, first of all, I wish that this scale here, there we go, waveform dB. There we go. Okay, so that's what the waveform looks like now that we've normalized. The problem with that approach is that while it works, and this will actually sound quite a bit louder than it did before, the limitation is, the problem is that it's making it louder based on the loudest peaks, or the peaks with the most amplitude. So once you've kind of that up there, whoops, got somebody who's talking in the background there. One second, guys. Okay. Yeah, so the problem with that is that you can't necessarily raise the overall waveform to a loudness level that makes sense or is consistent with your previous piece or consistent with any other standard out there. So while this works, and that's one way you can raise the volume, the trick is that you're going to be a little bit limited and it's going to be a little bit inconsistent in terms of what you can do. So
the Adobe software is far superior.
Well, I would say it has more functionality for sure. I'm careful to say superior because I know a lot of people are using Audacity, and it's how I got my start, and it's free. But yeah, it does have some limitations, and that's definitely one of them.
So let me rephrase the question then. If you were going to spend $50 a month or, buy a piece of software, is the Adobe program what you would buy today?
Oh,
and let's say put a $300 cap on it.
Yeah, that's a fair question. It's what I've chosen. I can say that for sure. And the reason I've chosen it is that it works well for what I'm doing. In the film industry, for example, most people are using Pro Tools still. Some are starting to use Audition in some of the things. So I think most of the major motion pictures are still done in Pro Tools. I use Audition, excuse me. One of the main reasons I do is, first of all, it's part of the Creative Cloud. So I already have the Creative Cloud, so it's, there's one obvious reason. The other one is that when I'm doing the tutorials, I like Audition, and I wish their names weren't so close. It's kind of a pain, but I like Audition because it has this, especially for someone who's learning, it has this interface that makes it really easy to kind of visualize what's happening. A lot of them are actually, a lot of the other apps that you can buy out there are going to be in multi-track mode all the time. So for example, Pro Tools is typically in this multi-track view, and it's a little bit more difficult to do offline processing of your audio in this view. You kind of have to pop out, you go to another, kind of to a plugin or another application, and then it brings it back in here anyway. But it's really nice if I'm working on just a single clip to really have this interface here, which allows me visually to see what's going on when I apply some sort of effect. So for me, I like Audition. I'm hesitant to say that it's the best out there because I think everyone has, everyone works a little bit differently, but it's the one I use and it works nicely.
All right. Follow up to something you were saying in the middle. I love listening to podcasts. It seems like the same podcast. One morning I've got to adjust my sound down. The next morning I run it all the way up and it's still not loud enough. It's the same podcast. I know we're being hypothetical. Do you think people are not setting and have a bookmark or whatever so that their audio is just flowing different directions? Is that just a rookie mistake on some of these that I'm listening to? Yeah, and I don't want to throw the name out,
sure.
But is there a preferred level?
Well, yeah, for sure. I think so. Here, and this is an emerging. There's no standard right now. Certainly not for podcasts. For television, in the United States and the European Union, there are standards. In the United States, the standard is -24 LKFS, which is the same as LUFS. Just another slightly different way of describing the same thing. In the European Union, they use this, there's an EBU standard, but they're -23 LUFS. And what that means is that all of the programs that go out on television have to be at that loudness level. And they also have standards for how much you can deviate from that. So it's, not everyone is kind of chained into this specific number, but they can, vary maybe 1 or 2 LUFS either direction. So those are the standards there. As far as podcasts are concerned, that's still an emerging thing. There's no sort of governing body for podcasts, really. And so one of the recommendations that I typically follow, and this applies also for YouTube videos or any sort of online distributed audio or video with audio, is I usually aim for a stereo audio file to be at -16 LUFS, and the perceptual equivalent, if it's a mono file, is -19 LUFS. And that's complicated, but just take my word for it for now on that. But
Okay.
so that's really, if you can aim for that, and again for podcasts, if they can do that, they can get consistent levels from episode to episode. And also for those that aren't as sort of, I guess, don't know quite as much about audio, but they're doing it because there's some topic that they love, which is great, which is awesome, and that's how we get so much great content out there, is that there are all these different people with different perspectives and things to talk about. Yeah, at some point I think everyone will get to a point where they hear about this. There are a couple of different ways you can go about it. Audition has this capability now. The new version that's supposed to come out before the end of the year also makes it a little bit easier, because one of the things that go along with that is you can see this waveform here, for example. We're getting dangerously close to 0 dB full scale, and that's getting dangerously close to clipping. And if I just play it back on my computer, it's not going to clip. It's going to be okay. If I push it hard enough, if I were to increase the volume here even more, or amplify it even more, this is going to, and I apply a limiter again, this is going to get crushed more and more, and it's eventually going to sound distorted anyway, even if we're technically not letting it clip. But beyond that, the other consideration is that once I compress this file into a lossy format, whether that be MP3 or with my video is a .mov file or a .mp4 file, I get to choose what kind of codec I use in there. Typically these days it's going to be AAC for video, for audio in video. And the problem is that those are lossy formats, and when you have a transient like this, again, a waveform that gets really, really close to 0 dB like that, once you go through that codec and it gets compressed down from a size standpoint, the file actually throws out information to make it smaller in a variety of different ways. The problem is that this can actually still distort, because it has to make some sacrifices. And what it will typically do, that most of those codecs do, is they'll take some of the information and throw it out, so things get interpolated. And this is an example where this one would probably clip if it were in an MP3 or an AAC file format. Right now it's WAV, so it's not going to. So I hope I'm not making this too complicated. But in any case, what I would do here, I can run through very quickly and show you what I would do in this particular case. So first of all, what I would do is some compression, and I would actually let's redo that. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this down, and I'm going to get it up to -24 LUFS as a start.
Can you do, and granted I'm really a novice,
Mm-hmm.
Can you record direct to this software, or
yeah, and
have presets already set each time?
Well, that's the trick. So let me show you the process, and we'll talk about presets. Because I think you can have presets, and in fact you have this effects rack here, which is really nice because you can actually just have a rack set up that says, for example, I want to have a compressor, and I want to have a hard limiter on there, and we'll come back to those. And you can have those already set there. You are going to have to tweak some of the settings, so it's not like a slam dunk, all I have to do is run it through this really quick every single time. You're going to have to kind of tweak it to the particular audio file that you're working on. But you can have them set up so it will save you a little bit of time, if that makes sense. So let me go ahead and just remove those just to kind of illustrate what I would typically do here. So let's see, I'm going to undo that again because I have, and undo that.
And the reason I asked that question is because right now I've got a Zoom H4n, and I also have the Tascam. So I would have to think about how do I get to record direct to Audacity compared to recording to those and then pull it in.
Yeah, the way you can, your Zoom H4n can act as an audio interface, so you can actually hook that up to your computer via USB. the computer will recognize it as an audio interface. Then you hook up your microphone to the Zoom H4, and it will record directly here in Audition.
Okay.
Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to first do some compression, because again, we have all of these transient peaks here that are sticking out, and they're going to get in our way here. So I go up to Effects, and I'm going to choose a single band compressor. I am going to compress any of the peaks that go, I think we're going to go -15. I just want to check on each side what that's going to do. So at the top of my window here, anything that it goes lower than that, we're going to compress. Anything that goes higher than that on this side, we're going to compress. So let's set our threshold to -15. That's just going to be my first pass. I'm okay to go 3-to-1 ratio on this, is how much it's going to compress. And again, because these are mainly just transients here, we're not really going to necessarily affect the overall sound of the audio that much by compressing transients. So we'll do that. We'll do our attack at 1, our release at 150, and we'll leave our output gain at 0. These are good starting points, the 1 and 150 for most dialogue, so I'll usually leave them there. Go ahead and apply that, and you can see it's kind of pulled it in now. It looks a little bit better managed. So let's go ahead and now try to do this match volume. And this time, let's try and take this, because I'm on a mono file, just a single channel, I'm going to go -19 LUFS. I'll leave the peak or the limiter on, and go ahead and run, and let's see what happens. Okay, it looks like we're still a little hot down here on the bottom. You can see some of these got chopped off. So I'm going to undo the compression and just do another pass. I'm going to tighten up that compression a little bit more. So I'm probably going to drop the threshold to -16, and I'm probably going to leave everything else just like it was. We're just about there. So there's our compression. Again, we're going to come up here to match volume. We're going to do -19 LUFS. Again, run that. And I think that's probably going to work for us. We are still chopping off some of the transients, but not so bad. Then what I'll do is I'll come in here and apply this limiter. And here's where I want to get to a true peak value of 1.5. So this is not a true peak limiter, but I can show you how we can kind of fudge it a little bit to make it a true peak limiter. Again, the version of Audacity that'll become, or sorry, Audition, that'll be coming out later this within the next few months here, this month or next month, will have a true peak limiter in it. And again, the target for true peak limiting is typically you want to get down to -1.5 dB true peak. And in fact, if I come out here to our amplitude statistics, if you don't have that, you just come up to Window and choose Amplitude Statistics. We'll run that, scan this audio file, and it will tell us right here our true peak amplitude is -0.06. So we're definitely not there yet. So that's when I want to pull out my limiter. And I'll say, okay, let's start at -1.5 dB. We'll turn the input boost to 0. Look ahead time 7 milliseconds is fine. Release time 100 milliseconds, great. Apply that. Then I'm going to run, and you can see it's actually chopped off all those right there. That's not necessarily ideal, but we'll see if it actually affects things. I'll go ahead and scan again. And you can see now our true peak amplitude is -1.44. If we wanted to be really hardcore about this, we could come in here and tweak it a little bit more. We might say, let's go -1.6. Apply, scan the selection again. Now we're at -1.54 dB true peak. So this would be safe to, at this point, compress for your final output, whether it be for a podcast or for video. Technically, we have some problems here. We've actually limited pretty hard here, and this actually can start to become audible when it's limited that distinctly or that harshly. And you also notice here we have another problem on top. None of these are getting chopped off. It's all of those on the bottom. And in fact, this is something I notice a lot with male voices in particular, or in cases where you do some sort of equalization to the audio. A lot of times your waveforms will become asymmetric, where there's more on the bottom than on the top, or the amplitude is larger on the bottom than the top. So there are some other things you can do that. Unfortunately, Audition does not have tools built in to do that I'm aware of, and that's where you have to pull in some other tools. But that's kind of the quick and dirty of how to loudness normalize your audio so that it's consistent from episode to episode, whether that, again, that be a podcast or a video. Does that make sense?
Yes, it's one of those that being so new and novice to it, I just have to play it play with it, and then go back and forth. And that's one of the reasons I like being able to ask these questions.
Yeah.
So, plus, I like how you keep these, and I can go back and listen again.
Yeah.
When I'm doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say there are also some on the YouTube channel. There are several episodes actually where we've covered this and in a little bit more detail. So you might go check those out. I think the one I would look at, let's go ahead and pull this up here. Okay. If we go to my channel. Okay. Come here into playlists. Something's going on with my browser here. What is it? Okay, that doesn't want to play nice. Let's see what Chrome will do for us. Let's see, we'll go here. Here. There is this one here, louder sound with audition. That didn't focus entirely on loudness normalization, but we did finish off with that. I would, let's see, let's come down to audio and sound for video. We'll pause that there. And in this playlist is where you're going to find most of the audio things. Here we have dialogue audio compression, so that's one that may be of use to you when you want to, you know, kind of deep dive a little bit into how to do the compression. Here's another one on compression. Another one on compression. That's a deep topic, and there's a lot to say here. This one here, dialogue audio post-processing for film and video, is probably the most comprehensive one, and that's worth taking a look at there. So it's the one with the microphone and the silhouette here. So so that's definitely one to keep on your list there when it comes time to process your next one.
Can you say the name of it, because the screen, it did not come so that I can see?
Yep. It's a dialogue audio post-processing for film and video.
All right. Thank you.
You betcha. Okay. Yeah, those are good questions, Bob. That is one of the most difficult things, I think, when you're getting started with audio, is how to get a consistent quality. And once you kind of dialed this in, it becomes kind of second nature. It's pretty easy to get that done. But go ahead and review those definitely for sure. And I think over time you'll start to feel a little bit more comfortable with it. And certainly, you know, come back if you get stuck along the way there. That's what we're hoping to accomplish here, is keep you moving forward. So thanks for that question.
Sure. Thanks, Curtis. I'm going to mute out and listen to everybody else.
You got it. Adrian, thanks for joining us here today. And it looks like, Adrian, you're muted right now, but you did ask a question here. Oh, there you are. Okay. We be posting this to YouTube afterwards. Yeah, we actually kind of did something a little bit different here. I was posting them to my main YouTube channel, but I think some of the subscribers who were not enrolled in the class kind of got confused and were getting a little frustrated that these massive episodes that were an hour long kept showing up in their feeds. So I actually moved it over to a separate channel. And in fact, let's show you where that's at. We will share this here. Sharing the browser on Google Hangouts is a challenge, but we'll make it work. I'll just show our entire screen. How about that? Okay, show all windows. Here we go. Okay, if we go to plus.google.com, actually, let's go to YouTube because that's what you asked about specifically. And it's going to be, I believe it's Curtis Judd Audio, where those are going. And it's this channel here. So it's actually titled Curtis Judd Audio. And you can see here's our current session that's going on right now. So this is where they'll be posted. It's separate from my main channel. And again, my hope here is that for those that want to kind of deep dive and get in on the conversation, this is where you'll find it here. But for those that are more interested in the shorter pieces that I typically do on my YouTube channel, they'll go to my main channel. So good question. Thanks for that, Adrian. Hope that makes sense and works for everybody. Okay. All right. Good deal. Let's check our Q&A panel, see if we've got any questions there. We do not have any questions as yet. So, okay. Couple of other things to cover. One of the things that when I was at NAB this last year, and I got a chance to go to the Adobe booth and talk to one of the software engineers for Adobe Audition, it was pretty interesting. He was able to show me several things that I didn't know how to do already in Audition. And one of the things that I think is, I hope is coming soon and that I've requested, but I don't think we have a great solution for yet unless you buy more expensive software. And, you know, frankly, $50 a month is pretty steep as it is for someone who's not making a living with this software. So one of the things that I've invested in, because I am doing some of this, is an application called RX, and I think we've talked about it before, but let me just show you how it solves that one problem. And again, this is functionality that I've requested to be in Audition in future versions. We'll see. Hopefully they can add this. I think they've definitely got the know-how to do it, but let me just show you really quickly here. Share this window again. Again, this is it's by a company called iZotope. This is RX5. And let's just open a file here really quickly that will illustrate this for us. And this is, again, a common problem that I've seen with, especially with men's voices. I don't see it nearly as often with women's voices, but it is a significant problem with men's voices. And let's just, first of all, I'm going to bring the loudness up a little bit here. Let's go to -26. And this one takes a while, but it is also, it has this true peak limiter in there, so it's doing some other things as well. Okay, so here's an example again of a waveform. You will notice again, this is an asymmetric waveform, meaning that the amplitude of the strongest, or the strongest waves here, the strongest peaks, are actually down at almost 1.5, whereas on the top here, they're peaking out at about -5. So that's what we would call an asymmetric waveform. In RX5 here, there is this tool called adaptive phase rotation. And if I just click process here, I don't even have to change any settings. I just click process here, and you'll notice that what happens to the waveform, give it a second here. Okay, now the peaks on both sides, this one's at about -4.5. This is probably this hottest one right here is probably -3.5. Same thing on this side. So it's actually kind of taken that and rotated the phase, rotated the wave a little bit. It sounds the same, but now it's actually not asymmetric. It's symmetrical on both sides. So that's one tool that's really, really helpful. And again, it doesn't change the sound of those, you know, the waveform that you're working with. It doesn't change the way it sounds. But what it does is it gives you a lot more headroom. So now, if I'm going to come in and do my compression, and I'll just pull up a compressor I have in here. Let's say I would want to go down to maybe, let's go to -13. and process that. Okay, it's pulled those in. Now, if I loudness normalize, this is very much here like the match volume in Audition. And in this case here, for example, I can say, okay, I have a mono file. I want to take it to let's go minus 19.5 actually is where I often go. Minus 19 is kind of the recommendation, but I don't want to have to compress so much, so I go to minus 19.5. That some people may frown upon that, but it's where personal preference comes in, I guess. We're going to leave our true peak at minus 1.5, click process, and let's see what happens this time. See if we are chopping off any of those transients in the process. So the reason this is so much slower is that it's actually having to calculate the true peak, which is actually a pretty intensive calculation because it's not represented by an individual sample. It actually has to go in and actually make some guesses there. So that actually looks visually to me, that would work okay because we're not obviously chopping off a whole lot of peaks. And you can see the main difference here is that we did that phase rotation first, so that gave us all this extra headroom where we didn't have to compress nearly as much to get it to the loudness target that we wanted to get it to. So that's what I'm hoping Audition can add in a future release. Right now it doesn't have it, and for that reason I'm using RX5. The problem with RX though is it's very expensive and it's not really, I don't think, accessible to enthusiasts. You really have to be in the professional range to get this, and that's why you know, it's tough to recommend because it's so expensive. So it's like recommending to, you know, all of us I'm sure would love to have a Sound Devices mixer recorder, but we can't, most of us really can't afford to do that, can't justify that given what we're doing. So anyway, there was one thing that I'm hoping that Audition can add in the future that would be really helpful. Let's see, one thing that I've also been looking at a little bit more now is, and I have this in, I did not buy this, this was actually provided to me by B&H Photo. We have here a Sennheiser microphone. I do most of my recording of dialogue indoors, the majority of it for my corporate pieces, and in those cases one of the biggest challenges of course is you've got a lot of reverb and a lot of echo, and so one of the things that I typically use is I use my, this is actually the Sennheiser MKH50, which is a supercardioid microphone. I don't own this one. The one I do own that I use most often is an Audio-Technica AT4053B. That's a hypercardioid small diaphragm condenser mic. And the difference between, as you probably saw in the course for those of you that have taken it, but the difference between hypercardioid and supercardioid is that supercardioid has a smaller tail on the back, so it picks up less of the sound, the waveform that's coming back and bouncing off the walls and things of that nature. It's not a ton, and it depends on the mic in particular, but what I wanted to do is get my hands on this. This one's supercardioid, so I want to be able to compare this to my Audio-Technica and see what the practical difference is. Do I get less reverb and echo from that room with a mic like this, there's supercardioid voice versus the hypercardioid mic that I have. So that'll be a little test that we'll do. What is interesting too is that in this mic is used in some professional productions. Probably the most common one that fits in this realm though is the Schoeps CMC 641. So it's also another supercardioid small diaphragm condenser mic. That one's even more expensive, $1,600 to $1,700 US. So another reason why I don't own that one yet. Someday in the future, perhaps. But so anyway, I wanted to see what the difference is in practical terms when you use a supercardioid versus a hypercardioid. So we'll have some things coming up on that here in the next little bit. Still not thrilled with the results. I've still been experimenting some with hiding lavalier microphones, and you know, frankly, I think that on professional productions, they will put lavalier mics on their talent, but they will also have boom mics, and I think the reason they do that is that there are so many circumstances where lavalier mics will pick up clothing noise. So it's just the reality. Are there things you can do? I'm still looking. I did see online there is something called, let me see if I can find it here. There's a kit where essentially there's a little device, a little plastic device, probably that big, you know, just little bit larger than lavalier microphones, and you put the lavalier microphone inside of it, and then you mount that underneath someone's shirt or jacket or whatever it is they're wearing. And that is supposed to reduce some of the noise, but it's expensive. They sell it as a kit with a bunch of other accessories, and it's like $500 US. So it's just a really, really, really expensive thing. It looks like it works really well, but that is a little bit too expensive. I also have ordered some more Moleskin to give that a try again, and haven't had great success with it. So if there's still some things there, and this is, I guess, me just saying, okay, there's got to be a way to do it, but it's not easy, and to an extent where I feel really comfortable with it. And I think I mentioned before too, on was it last month, the month before, one of the productions I worked on, we were trying to lav up one of the actors, and he was wearing a sport coat, and we just could not get that mic positioned. I mean, we probably spent 20 minutes trying to get that thing positioned so that the mic wasn't picking up clothing noise. And every time he moved, and the piece required him to move around a fair bit, not a ton, but just walking and gesturing with his arms and stuff. But we couldn't get that thing to be quiet. And we actually, eventually, it was a dark sport coat. We ended up just attaching that lav to the lapel, and technically it's visible, but it blends in pretty well. So it's not standing out and super distracting everybody, but it's not, when you're doing a narrative piece like that, it would be nice to have that hidden. So that's what we had to resort to. But anyway, I'll continue to work on that, and we'll have a piece here before too much longer, hopefully, on how to do that. Let's see. I'm dying for Adobe to release the new version of Audition again, because I really want to see that new peak limiter. Because if that works, the true peak limiter that we were talking about, and the loudness normalization, the nice thing, from what I understand, is that not only will Audition have that capability, but that will also be an option when you're exporting your video from Premiere Pro. So in essence, when you go to export your video from Premiere Pro, it'll just be a matter of checking a checkbox, and it will automatically take care of meeting a loudness target that you want to meet for your audio. Plus, it will also take care of any compression that needs to be done to get you there, and also help you meet a true peak target, so minus 1.5 dB true peak, for example. If they can pull that off, and if it works well, that will make things so much easier. Then it'll just be a matter of bringing your audio into your video, sync, if you record it separately, sync it up to the picture, and then on the way out, it'll take care of that loudness. So that's a good quick and dirty workflow, I think. And for, again, for YouTube things, that may be good enough. I think that there's still going to be a place very much for those that want to reach a higher quality threshold, where you have a little bit more control over how much compression gets applied and things of that nature. You'll still want to do it manually, probably, but it'll be nice to have that option to automate a lot of that. So that's a pretty exciting change there from our friends over at Adobe. And I guess, again, it's a steep price, $50 a month. I realize that, and it's tough for enthusiasts to afford that. But what I can say that's been positive about Creative Cloud from Adobe is that it really does seem like they're pushing new functionality out quite a bit faster than they have in the past. And so, as much as I kind of cringe every month when I have to pay $50 for that, it's nice that they have really definitely moved those applications forward pretty quickly. So there's that. Final Cut Pro, on the other hand, which actually, if I love Final Cut, I will confess, and in fact I do most of my editing in Final Cut. I really like the magnetic timeline, but the problem with Final Cut is it's not as easy to work with as it looks like Premiere is becoming in terms of managing audio. So for example, there's no way that I know of, nor does Apple really share their plans for the future on additional audio features or any other features they'll be adding to that app. Doesn't look like, as far as I can tell, that they're looking to add a similar type function like what I just described with loudness targeting for the audio. So unfortunate. I really like the way that Final Cut Pro works, but it's a little bit sad to see that A, they're not sharing what they're going to do in the future, their roadmap, and B, they're not as yet they haven't included any of that. So we'll see where that ends up in the future. I did do, I don't know if I talked about this yet, but I did do my first edit in DaVinci Resolve, where I actually edited a video from start to finish using DaVinci Resolve 12. And they have really upped their game, I think, quite a lot in that release. That's a fantastic application. I still use that as my primary color grading software. The things that I found a little bit annoying is that the audio sync doesn't work very well, which is a little bit frustrating. So they have some opportunity for improvement there for sure. And while I think all of the function, well, not all of the functionality, a lot of the functionality that an editor would need is now there in DaVinci Resolve. It still feels a little bit, to me, it still feels a little bit, I can't work as quickly in it as I can Premiere and Final Cut. And I think Final Cut I could work the quickest. Premiere is probably a good close second, and then DaVinci Resolve seems a little bit slower than that. That could partly be a learning curve thing. In the past, most of my editing's been done in Premiere and Final Cut, but and I've only done one piece in DaVinci Resolve, and that's not a fair comparison, to be honest and transparent. I would definitely need to work with it for a month before I could really make any assessment on that. But it does feel, I can say this at this point, I think, it does feel a little less refined, and I think there's some work that needs to be done in terms of kind of fine-tuning that for prime time as far as editing is concerned. And on the audio side in particular, it seems like they need some work. So there are some thoughts on that. This may seem a little funny to you, but we'll go ahead and tell you about it anyway. And this is funny to me. I wasn't expecting this. I do have a relationship with Rode microphones. It's not any sort of exclusivity thing. I've bought most of my microphones, but sometimes they send me some stuff, and they sent me this. The VideoMic Me. And if you can see the photo here, it's really made as a kind of like a mini shotgun mic to hook into your phone. And I know this is, definitely aimed more at the vloggers and things of that nature, but the reality is that even with corporate video, we're seeing more and more cases where some of the footage I get that the clients want to include is footage from smartphones, whether I like it or not. And a lot of it's shot at various locations where they're not necessarily interested in sending me there to capture the footage. They might just have me come to their headquarters location. But having something like this could potentially improve the audio on the footage that's captured by other people in the farther reaches. So I guess I'm gonna put that to the test and see how it sounds. The tests I've seen so far sound pretty promising, so it's kind of an interesting thing. It's really made for Apple devices, so it's really made for Apple iPhone. But I'll see if it also will work with non-Apple devices as well. It does have this retaining clip that helps hold the microphone in place. I think it looks like it plugs into the 3.5 millimeter input down here, and then there's this retaining kind of clip thing that keeps it from pointed in the right direction when you're actually shooting video. So I don't know how well that's going to work on Android phones, and I think it depends on the phone and where that jack is located. So anyway, that'll be kind of a fun little thing. And as non-professional as these sometimes seem, they can actually be useful tools, and it's useful for even professionals, I think, to have things like that in their kit that they can turn to in circumstances where they might need something like that. So that'll be an interesting one. Also working on one other piece here that, and I guess I'll just share my bias when if we want to call it that, and I think it is what it is. I think it is a bias. I prefer not to use wireless if I can avoid it, or I prefer to have a backup to wireless in cases where I am going to be using wireless. And I've been pretty happy with my Rode Link wireless system, but there are circumstances where I might need to love another person, so I only have 2 Rode Link kits, so I may need to add another person to that mix there. And in some cases, if I am running into issues with the Rode Link, and I'll be honest, haven't yet, so it's been pretty solid so far, but just in case that ever did happen, one thing I like to have on hand is, and I think, I can't remember if I covered this in the course or not, but I like to have a small recorder on hand that has a 3.5 millimeter input, and then I can just run my lavalier into that and slide this into the pocket of the Talent. And there's some advantages to that. There's some disadvantages as well. This would, and actually outside of the United States, there are some recorders that kind of fit into the category. But they're even smaller. They're way smaller. This is the Tascam DR05, but they're actually probably half the height of this, and they're thinner than this. So it's much easier to hide it on your talent, but it's a full-fledged recorder as well with a 3.5 millimeter input. So you connect your lavalier mic to that, start it recording, set the levels, start it recording, and you're good to go. And the nice thing is that these days, even capturing high-quality audio, if you go 24-bit, 48 kilohertz, doesn't take up a lot of card space. So it's not a problem to, put it on somebody, start it rolling, and just kind of leave it there, leave it going for the duration of whatever it is you're shooting. So I actually use these recorders for that purpose today from time to time. But I'm excited to see some of the developments. Tascam actually has one, but it's not available in the United States, and I understand why that is, but for whatever reason it's not. JuicedLink, if you've heard of that company, is a small company. I think they're based in California. Robert is the guy who's, I think he's the owner and the engineer that does all the engineering work for their devices. But he probably a year and a half ago announced what he calls the Little Darling, and the Darling is starts with a capital D, capital A, capital R, which stands for Distributed Audio Recorder, which is exactly what I'm talking about here. It's like a Zoom H1 or a Tascam DR05, but without the built-in microphones and much smaller. So I actually talked to him. I thought maybe they had fallen off the face of the earth and they weren't doing that anymore, but just got a response from him earlier this week that he is still working on it. And the reason that it's taking so long is that they've kind of backed off and they realized there were some additional features they wanted to include, or they really needed to include in it to get some widespread adoption. So he's kind of gone back to the drawing board a little bit, and he just received the new printed circuit board, so he's putting that together and doing some testing. So hopefully before too much longer, hopefully start of the year-ish time frame. And he didn't say this, but this is my guess and my hope is we'll see the first few devices along those lines to come out from him, so we can start putting those to the test. Those are pretty interesting there too. The the advantage of those as well is that if again you're kind of a solo shooter and you don't have someone else there to keep track of the sound, that's another option. So, and you don't run into the issues of on that one particularly the Little Darling from JuicedLink, the buttons are all recessed, so it's not like the talent is likely to accidentally turn off the recording. That's the problem with these. I haven't had that issue, but this one's the Zoom H1. But on this one, for example, the record button is just this big button here. I haven't run into a lot of people accidentally pressing that and turning it off, although it's definitely possible. But these switches on the back have been bumped in the past, and they're kind of important things. Like one is the auto level, which is awful. I always turn that off because that just creates a mess of your audio. But anyway, it'll be interesting to see when those come out and how those could be a nice addition. Also, it'll be interesting to see how much they cost. Hopefully not too through the roof. All right, well, that's everything I have prepared for today. Let's just double check here. I don't see any questions in the queue. We have a couple of... Oh, great, Rick. Thanks for that. It looks like just back a little bit here, Rick, you mentioned the regular or non-advanced version of RX costs significantly less. I believe it was $400 new, $399. In any case, quite a bit less, and it also does have the phase rotation. So thanks for that, Rick. Okay. Well, I think we're good for this week. Thanks again, Rick, Bob, and Adrian. Who, the other two looks like they dropped off. But Rick, thanks for joining us today. And thanks everyone else who was able to join over there at the Google Plus page. And we'll talk to you all again soon.
Great. Thanks a lot, Curtis.
Take care. Thank you. Bye.